Okay.
All right. So how do you represent their gender identity now? How do you represent the gender that they were previously assigned? How do you deal with people that don't identify with either of those binaries? And so we just one after the other, question. And we didn't necessarily have the answer. We just knew that we had the questions and that they should be resolved. And in fact, actually, we were actually forcefully advocating that, the whole element should just be scrapped. But the word came back to us that as part of this transition from an Anglo-American cataloging standard to an international cataloging standard, there were European constituencies for which this was a tombstone. They would not adopt RDA unless their cataloging interests were represented, and their cataloging interest was that they had specified gender in their authority records for however long. So it's like, well, it's not a required element. So what do we do with it? And we're still struggling with it. In fact, I think they've actually taken, so RDA used to, the current issue of RDA has it in there and has a designated vocabulary list of, male, female, unspecified, and other. I think is that in the beta toolkit, it actually directed you to use a vocabulary of your choice. So you're now able to, you're not constrained by those RDA choices, and RDA doesn't have to jump into the pool of gender identity in incorporating it into the cataloging code. It's just, we just allow, there's a parking space for it in the code, and it is up to the community of practice to determine whether and how we're going to implement it. So it's, and it's one of those things. And actually, it's very consonant with what's going on in the MARC community, because I originally served directly on CCDA as a voting member, and then once my term was up, I transitioned to being the liaison between CCDA and the MARC Advisory Committee. And the MARC Advisory Committee gets all these proposals for how MARC is still growing. We're still adding subfields and redefining things and examining it. And people come to us, and MARC is not used solely for cataloging. There are other uses to which it is occasionally put, and much like the Germans, actually a lot of stuff comes from the German language cataloging community, because they use MARC in they have their own interface for cataloging, and in order to, so they catalog in that interface, and then they marchize the data to transmit it back and forth, and then it gets remapped into whatever their interface is, which is the way that MARC should work. We're the crazy ones, because we're forcing human beings to deal with this machine construct. But every once in a while, but not every once in a while, fairly frequently, as they become more tightly integrated with MARC 21, as they're like, well, we have this piece of data that we park here, and there's no place to park it in MARC proper, and then output it back out. So we need you to do this thing. And the rest of us, like, well, we don't do that, and we don't need that.
Like, I have noticed as I'm looking for records on OCLC, that their records do look different. Like, they have shorter description fields, and it just looks different than an Anglo.
Right. But at the end of the day, MARC is not a cataloging standard, and it's not prescriptive. It's just there as a communication standard. So if someone comes to us and says, like, hey, I need your standard to allow this piece of data to go back and forth. It's like, okay, do we have a place, you know, you've made your case. There's not someplace else in which to park it, and there's not a conflict with where you're proposing to park it. So, okay, let's go with it. You know, we used to have big, you know, battles, but wow, this is really a good idea, and it's like, and finally we all kind of said, yeah, it's like, it's not our place to choose. So it's kind of there, and you know, and these dialogues are important because we do want the cataloging code to be
Inclusive.
yes, thank you, inclusive and not prescriptive of how people think of things, and we want to be respectful of those dynamics. So the pushback is really good. It's just that every once in a while it's like, well, yes, you know, you're not telling us something that we haven't already wrangled with and you know and fought for, and it's like, but you know, we you know, at the end of the day, you know, we took it with you know, so CCDA, you know, big explosion in CCDA over this topic. We go to the ALA rep, the ALA rep goes back to the JSC, and the JSC says, well, yeah, that's lovely, but if we don't flex on this, then the vision for getting a fully international cataloging code just stops right here. And it's like, so we're gonna have to do that.
We haven't really talked yet about, and this is something that, you know, sort of drives my staff crazy, that there are a certain level of decisions where you're working within that, your community, your town, your audience, the type of people that you have the collection for, and you're making decisions based on that, whether it's call numbers or subject headings or things like that.
And that's, sorry.
No.
And that's one of the other key challenges as we transition from ACER 2 to RDA and to RDA, I call it 2.0, but the RSC insists that it's not a second edition. It's like, you're totally changing the format, you're totally changing the content. It's like, this is not just like an integrating resource change. It's like, you've completely reworked this.
Right.
The scope and nature of this beast is different. So it is a fully informed
A lot of
second
different
edition.
factors
But
coming together.
I think they're just, you know, it's like, oh, the first edition came out in 12 and we're putting out a second edition, you know, 7 years later. And it's like, oh, you know, and at the time it looked like it might be, you know, it came out in 12, we really didn't start implementing until 14, and then by 16 we're already looking at changing it again. So we really had like a 2-year window before we came out with, before we started contemplating a second edition. So I think they're more worried about the optics than anything else. But at the end of the day,
I was reading on my, you know, Apple News or something the other day that I think it's the US is gonna come out with another option on passports, male, female, and unspecified, or I choose not to indicate. So since we're at that point, and since you guys were the ones that brought this to my attention, do you have any questions for John? Any more about the background with this? Or where it's going in the future?
From the article that Amber worked on, she basically points towards the practice that you should be as complete as possible with the record, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the problem, according to her, was that you're encouraging people to describe somebody else's gender.
Right.
Yeah,
Even though it's not required.
doesn't it say like to make your best guess, essentially?
Yes,
It
it was the conference or the webinar, I think, that said that.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just went through NACO training, and you know, and they're very cognizant there about
Name authority.
name authority.
I forget what it is.
I don't even know what it says, yeah, I forgot what it
NACO and
says.
SACO, name authority.
So, yeah, so anyway, so back in the day, the Library of Congress set up name authority records and subject authority records, and then they realized that they couldn't keep up, so they started, kind of, certifying other libraries to, make contributions to the name authority file and the subject authority file. And, so, and in order to do that, that's the NACO program and the SACO program. And so they're very clear about and even RDA itself is very clear about, this is, everyone has to have a name. If we're gonna refer to something, we gotta have a way to refer to it. So there's a requirement that there has to be a preferred name. And then there are things that you add to the name in order to disambiguate it. So, I got rid of my Myers John F.
Like
So,
musical group or photographer.
right. Well, typically, birthday, full form of name. These things are required. And then there are other elements that you can add, and you can even record this in, now that RDA, so the big thing with ACR 2 is it was only concerned with developing that character string by which you would know someone. So Myers John F, 1964, as a distinct from Myers John F, 1941, my dad. So that date served to distinguish us. RDA concerns itself, and the only thing we worried about fleshing out were the bibliographic records. RDA is entity agnostic, so it's telling us that, whatever we're describing, we should describe it to the extent possible with the information we have. And so when with respect to people and corporations, we're actually implementing things that were kind of emerging in MARC. So ASR 2 just told us, develop the string. If you ever look at a MARC authority record, it's like, it tells us to develop the string, and then it tells us to develop the cross-references. But of course, you have to have justification for why you're choosing those things. So in MARC, there are note fields that record, what book you found that form of a name in, and where you found it in, I should say, not book, but resource. And so RDA actually encapsulates that information practice, and then has now articulated, because of the development of things in FRAD with respect to the attributes around the person. So we have a time when we're born and a time when we die, and and then places where we've been, and the language that we use, and in fact, gender, in however we choose to identify it. We have nationalities, and so on, and so on. And we have professions and areas of activity and areas of research, and so on. So, so these are all fleshed out as options to record, but RDA doesn't specify that we don't have to record all of them or even any of them other than a name, unless they're needed to disambiguate us from someone else. And some of them are, so if there are, so you're gonna be a Lisa Pitkin too. All right. So this can be Lisa Pitkin, and you're Lisa Pitkin, and you both write. You both each write a book, but we don't know anything else about your publishers are very discreet, so you don't give birth dates. We don't have any other information around, you don't have LinkedIn profiles that we can find that have extra information. So we just have Lisa Pitkin 1 and Lisa Pitkin 2. How are we going to differentiate you? Well, it's like we could say, you've written a book on cataloging. What's your hobby?
Dogs.
Dogs. All right. So we could have Lisa Pitkin, and then we could record the fact that she is a cataloger, and then we can qualify her name with, we convert the forms, Pitkin, comma, Lisa, parentheses, cataloger. Our other Lisa Pitkin is written about dogs, and so this is, her job, her area of interest is the dog enthusiast, shall we say? So we would have Pitkin, comma, Lisa, dog enthusiast. So we would not use gender, though, for example, in that case. That's actually one of the things that is not used to differentiate. Although it would be really handy sometimes when you have Pat Smith and Pat Smith. Kind of like that SNL character. Hi, it's Pat. And so it's just, it's a great issue, and it's an important issue.
Question.
Yes.
What was the reason, you were like describing that they came back and they were like, this is, you said tombstone or whatever,
Right.
this is a tombstone. What was their reason?
Because it was just part of that Carolyn community's long-standing practice, and they weren't willing to give it up.
Do you think it was partly cultural, it's a more conservative culture? Or
I can't say because I don't know that Catalonian community's practice. I will say, it was many of, unlike English, which is
that's true.
basically for the most part our nouns are neutral, genderless. Many of the European languages have gendered nouns, and so there may be just kind of more of a mindset that things are explicitly either male or female.
Interesting.
It is thoroughly conjecture on my part in that area, but that was the thing that came back. I said, well, it's like if we don't accede to this demand, we aren't going to have an international cataloging code, and the community was big enough that if it had, it would have been like the League of Nations. I said, okay, well, we've got a League of Nations, but the United States is not part of it. So
come back in 20 years and we'll see where we're at.
Yeah, well.
US is not
Break
part of
apart,
that.
change
Pardon?
US is not part of that area. US.
The United States is part of RDA, yes. I was making a reference to it earlier. A precursor to the United Nations was the League of Nations, which was, curiously enough, an idea of Woodrow Wilson's, who was our president during World War I. And after the end of World War II, the League of Nations was brought into existence, but the United States never joined it. It was based in Geneva, Switzerland, and didn't really have, if it had been fully formulated and the United States had been part of it, there might have been adequate cohesion to avoid World War II. And so, so it's just kind of that example. Well, it's like if you're gonna make a worldwide thing, you gotta make a worldwide thing. So, yes.
Is there any type of committee or organization that is like catalogers against genderizing RDA or something like that?
No, I think it was. I think the biggest, I know we had those discussions. We weren't, we didn't specifically have a task of degenderizing RDA. It was just one of those things that it had emerged as an element, and we were actually kind of recall being taken aback by it, and we argued pretty forcefully. I don't know what the other constituencies' internal dialogues were.
Jen, can you speak to like what some of the interest groups are within ALA that have to do
Oh
with
goodness. Yes. So, well, I have to think about this for a second. So there are constituencies on CCDA. So CCDA is comprised of 9 members. There's a chair and 8 regular voting members. There's a couple of interns. And then there are liaisons to, constituencies within ALA and constituencies outside of ALA. So inside of ALA, like the Public Library Association has a representative, I think ACRL has a representative.
It's academic.
Public Library Association, academic, Association of College and Research Libraries. I have to think around the table. The Government Documents Roundtable has a liaison. There are a few others. Then there are also non-ALA associations like the American Theological Librarians Association, American Law Librarians Association, Music Librarians Association. Then there are some other constituencies that are non-associations. So OAC, which is they catalog media stuff, and I can never remember what that acronym is. Then the PCC, which is the group that kind of oversees those NACO and SACO programs. It's a program for cooperative cataloging. They have a liaison. There's a liaison between CCDA and the subject cataloging community. There's my position with the MARC cataloging community. If you just type in ALA CCDA or elect CCDA, you'll get the full roster of.
And then if you go outside of cataloging, there's, some of the general interest groups like gay, lesbian, and whatever that round table is.
So there's
I don't know if that would cover any of it, but-
GLBTRT, which is now the Rainbow Roundtable, just changed
There
the
you
name.
go. I'm not sure.
Well, there was, back in the, it's like, it used to be the gay librarians task force or something, and it's kind of evolved over the years, and then, there was a
I
time.
forget if Nyla has something.
There was a time when it had, when everything was gay lesbian, and around 20 years or more ago, it flipped to lesbian gay, and then, and so the GLBT sequence was a little bit anachronistic, and
That's
there
a
was
more
there was a
general
sense
type
that
of group.
it was not only anachronistic in terms of the sequence of letters, but it was insufficiently inclusive as well. So there's a lot of, and that process took 5 years to find a new name for that roundtable.
So everything's evolving all the time, basically.
And they actually did at one point have a liaison to CCDA, but around 20 years ago, it was determined that there needed to be a cataloging interest in an organization in order to sit at CCDA. It couldn't just be an ALA group that wanted to be at the table.
So since
Yeah.
these guys have to leave
Yeah.
at 6, and you giving us so much background about
Right.
the wider universe
Right.
of the cataloging world, are there specific questions that you guys have about Ferber, about RDA, about the world of cataloging that you always were curious about? This is the guy to ask. I know it's kind of overwhelming, and even as a cataloger, it's overwhelming for me, so.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily a full-time
choose
cataloger,
what you're playing with.
but, yeah. Charlene, I know you had some questions, which I unfortunately did not, he did answer them, okay, excellent.
That answered a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly specifically what the
Remember,
question was, but it was to
one was
try to
like,
distinguish.
Why is
between-
a title a manifestation or something?
Well, it was not necessarily like, it's not the difference between work expression, manifestation, and item.
I think it was based on the chart from the RDA toolkit.
But it was
for
like in the
examples of how to do a
record,
book, yeah.
like in the record, I think it had a title. And I was just I don't remember what it was. It was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's really challenging parsing RDA with today's records, because they are composite records. There are pieces in a bibliographic record that function, most of it functions at the manifestation level, in Ferber speak, but there are, you know, that relationship to the author and that relationship to the name of the, I mean, each, you know, so this is an item, and if we went into the bookstore and there were, you know, a dozen of them on the shelf, that would be a small subset of the manifestation. So that's a set of all items that have the same content and the same format and other things. And then of course the stuff that the conceptualization of this text block is the expression, and then the idea that is then expressed by this text block represents the work. And so that work has to be known by a title. So there's a title to the work, which then is kind of inferred from the title of the manifestation. And there's a relationship between that work and its creator, which we know as, you know, in MARC speak, it's the 100 field. In old library catalog speak, it's the main entry. And we embed that in the bibliographic record, but that actually is a relationship that exists at the work level. So this person is responsible for having this idea and creating this content, and then they've expressed it in this language, so that and this set of string of characters. So that's kind of, you know, whatever the manuscript is and the words that they've chosen become like the expression level. And then we have the manifestation is, you know, there's a set of books out there produced by this publisher in this place at this time that bear the following statements of a title and a statement of responsibility. You know, so, and of course, you know, there probably aren't very many of these out, but say, you know, Hamlet. So there's the idea of, you know, Hamlet, indecisive prince in Denmark whose dad got killed by his uncle, yada yada, mayhem ensues. That's the work, and, you know, and we can decide what the title of that is. But then, you know, the actual, you know, and we know of it as Hamlet, and that's how we refer to it. But actually, it's like the tragedy of Hamlet. You know, yada yada. So different books will have different manifestation statements around it.
I think the hardest part to understand is, you know, I'm guessing for you guys and for me as well, you have like the theoretical level, as they describe it, the work
Yes.
and expression, and then you have the more physical, identifiable level, which is the manifestation.
Right.
And the items.
How do I get the work done? Which of course is the big challenge as we go from this continuum from AACR through to the RDA. You know, if you work through AACR2 and you work, you know, if you kind of read it cover to cover, or you could make a selective progression through the rules. You know, you could go in and say, okay, there's a chapter on describing books. It's like, okay, I can go in and I can find all the rules for describing this book, and those rules are going to be in order to cover. It's like, okay, what's the first thing I'm going to run? What's the first thing I want to state about this book? The title. What are the first rules I run across in our AACR2 about describing a book? The title. And then you move on to the edition, naturally into the edition statement and the publication statement and the extent statements and so on and so forth. RDA got a little bit away from that. It was because it kind of separated out the manifestation details from the work details, but you could still reasonably follow it along as a functional cataloging code. And there were in AACR2, there were decisions honed over a century of work, you know, from Cutter and even beforehand, Pendency did cataloging rules for the British Museum, and the British Museum Library. And so we have this long continuum of practice that was documented in these rules and guidance. And then there were every once in a while there was like, well, if you run across this, it's like everything is pretty straightforward. 90% of the time it's like everything's straightforward. It's like, look at the title page, find the title. Well, what if you don't have a title page? Well, okay, here are some alternative approaches. It's like, all right, it's like everything is usually, you just got a book. So, with a single title in it, and you're good. Well, what if you open up the title page and it actually has 3 titles on it, and then there are 3 little piece segments in it that are different as well? All right, so here are your options for doing
There's always exceptions, that's the rule.
right. And so we migrate through, and then we'll get to the beta toolkit now, which will be RDA 2.0, hopefully. Then it's more of a data dictionary. So it just has this list of, these are the entities, these are the elements that go with the entities, and you have to have a framework in place to know, it's like, all right, what are the elements that I need to actually use to describe a book? I have to know ahead of time. And so that is going to be the preserve of, what have they been calling it? Application profile. That's how what you're supposed to do. And then and all the choices are now agnostic, so they all live at the same level. You can do A, B, or C, and they're in no particular order. And they're not saying whether you should do one thing or the other. You get to pick and choose.
So what's your question, Shirley?
I only want to ask it if it can be a quick answer.
Yeah.
How can pages signify an expression if an expression is abstract?
Because they don't, they're part of the manifestation.
That's what I said, but that's not the books.
Oh, really?
The RDA workbook there.
Let's see. It won't be the first time that I've had a significant disagreement with a cataloging authority, so.
Okay, so it says that, I was looking at the wrong fucking lines when I was thinking it, but no, it says the text is the expression and the manifestation has the pages.
Okay.
Thank you, that was a quick answer.
Well, hey, that's minor operator errors are easier to rectify than dealing with a major conceptual disagreement around what constitutes something. So it's nice to know that the authority in your book is not in disagreement with me, who is actually the more authoritative authority.
Did you have a question, Jamal?
Yeah, like most of the book has this page. So
Yes.
is it part of the metadata or it's a different?
Right, so, well, it depends, so what Jamal is looking at, for those of you online, oh, look at that, we can take a bump, is what's the back side of the title page, which is
This is the text page? No,
so
the back
if you look on the front,
Yeah, this is the
it's the
back.
title page.
Yeah.
The back is actually so normally we use, again, the Latin comes back into play. So the front side of a page is the recto, and the back side of a page is the verso. So in cataloger talk, this is the title page verso, or abbreviated TP verso. And
The reverse of the.
so basically, but that's fancy cataloger talk for saying the back side of the title page. And there are actually several blocks of data on that title page, or on that title page verso.
Yeah.
I'm
didn't
gonna have
bring
to
my
borrow
copies.
one. Thank you, Jesse. So if you look at the top, it says copyright 2014 Margaret Maring. And so since there's no information on the title page around the date of publication, that actually is part of the real descriptive metadata for this book.
I did tell them that oftentimes the publication date is not listed and you have to go with the.
Yeah, you have to substitute with the copyright date.
But the big thing that you typically see on the title page verso is this Library of Congress cataloging and publication data, which then it looks like a catalog record. And that actually is not part of the descriptive metadata for this book. It is a record of the descriptive metadata that was supplied by the cataloger that the Library of Congress then you deployed as a preliminary catalog record. But it's very
It's also
useful.
in the
It's
Chamber.
handy for
Remember,
people that
should
don't
be
have
that.
access to a bibliographic utility. So if you know, people that
Like
have like
OCLC.
a small library in their religious institution, that, you know, they are just kind of cataloging with volunteers, you can go here and cheat. And the Library of Congress is giving you you don't have to go online to look for the
Yeah.
catalog record, it's pretty much right there. So in fact, actually, it's quite annoying when I teach cataloging classes and want to do real live exercises with books, because I have to tell people, like,
Don't look.
don't, and you put a sticky note over that, because that pretty much gives you the answer. And then there's some more information. So then below that is more information around the publisher, which is kind of duplicative around the stuff that's on the cover. So, but there are times when the publisher's not on the cover or on the title page. So then you kind of, it can be recorded on that first.
And I was saying, you know, I'm coming across more books that are, you know, we get on Amazon or whatever that are published through CreateSpace, and they have like no cataloging data whatsoever.
Yeah, that's the brave new world of catalog.
So any parting words before you guys leave?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Discussion of gender and everything's kind of very interesting. The fact that like the Europeans were like that was the be all end all.
Yeah, and it wasn't all Europeans. It was
Yeah.
one constituency within the European bloc. So yeah.
Well, I always thought it was interesting that like our language was not so gendered,
Yeah.
everything else is.
Yeah. Seems like a strange hill to die on for me. So.
Well,
So we
evolving
can create
issue.
our committee for catalogers who do not genderize other people through cataloging.
Well, it's, you know, and I think, you know, different catalogers take different approaches. Some people think it's like, well, you know, it's like, well, if there's a Pat Smith out there, it might be important for figuring out, you know, it's like, well, it's like, you know, I've got a picture on the back, you know, and you know, you can't really go
Can't
on
go
that,
like that.
but there are people that will, you know,
Or
that
maybe
will-
the cataloger should reach out to the person now that we have.
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah,
usually,
that's
you know,
how-
we do. That's part of the process, you know, a lot of times they're, you know, time-wise, you just relied on what was in the book, and nowadays, you know, a lot of times like, oh, you know, this piece of data is supported by an email or a phone call, you know, either to the publisher or the agent or to the individual themselves. I actually had to do that recently for an author. It's like, can you tell me? It's like I see you worked at a university, but and you have this name, but it's used by I can see at least 4 other PhD theses, and I don't think any of them are in your area of specialization. So I think you're a distinct person. So I need, you know, and usually it's like you're asking them. It's like if you're comfortable giving me your birth date or, you know, your full middle name. That's usually a safe thing. You know, and I, you know, being aware of the issue, I don't include gender in my authority records. You know,
But like, I feel like it should be, I think there needs to be like an advocacy campaign about it, so that other people can realize that they don't have to.
yeah.
Well, now that you've taken this class, you guys can be, you know, educators for this issue.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. See you next week. So, sorry, Jamal, I knew they had to leave early, so.
Your next
Another
question.
quick question was like this part, not the level
Right, that's
of
the-
record.
Yes.
So I'm just asking about the records. Every person, like the popular book, the print, and then put it in the Library of Congress catalog, or they just share with them? I don't feel like.
Right, so most national libraries have a depository requirement, where, the books published in that country are submitted to the National Library. So the Library of Congress typically gets a copy of everything that's published, in the United States. In order for this to happen though, of course, you can't include cataloging in the publication if the Library of Congress doesn't get the book until after it's published, right? They'll put the cart before the horse. So what happens is that the publishers submit a galley, a pre-publication version of the book, to the Library of Congress, which then does the initial cataloging effort and then round trips the catalog record back to the publisher so that it can then be put in the final product.
It's kind of like they have to get approval from them.
It's not so much approval, it's just, they're just they're giving them an enhancement. So.
One of my colleagues used to work at the Times-Union, the local newspaper, and her husband still does. So they give us like the book review copies that they get free from the publishers.
Oh, nice.
So we'll put them out for staff to take for free, but they look like a book, but it'll say very clearly not for resale. This is, pre-publication or
Got
whatever.
proof.
Right, exactly. And then remember last week, I was telling you about the program where my library got the free books from our local congressman. That's how they get the books to give away. We got books from Paul Tonko.
Oh, wow.
So there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes that nobody knows about. So any other questions we have? Is there any things you want to say to kind of cap off? I would be interested, since I am just starting to do RDA cataloging myself.
Yeah.
Is how
No,
you.
you've been doing RDA catalog
Well,
for 5 years.
I know,
I'm sorry.
I know, I have.
But yeah, it's
Perfect.
it's like the old palm olive commercial. You've been soaking in it.
Yes, exactly. But how, we are just starting for these guys to get into the MARC format.
Right.
So their assignment for this week was do some descriptive cataloging,
Okay.
book of their choice.
Yeah.
For like the first part of a cataloging record, which would be the physical description, that type of stuff. We haven't got to the subject catalog.
Right.
Now with RDA, how do you approach things beyond the, the descriptive cataloging part and the subject cataloging part, as far as reflecting the, different Ferber levels within the record? Like we've talked about in the 3XX fields, you have the carrier, the media type, and all that type of stuff. You have a 776 field, which is a link to other types of formats. And I started watching one webinar, which would, I had to stop because it was really over the top, but they really approached it from the RDA toolkit, that you're going in from this very theoretical point, and I don't think that's, in real life, people don't have the time to approach it from that direction.
It's really challenging, having cut my teeth on AACR2, I basically am doing, I have a process of doing cataloging that I know from my AACR2 stuff, and I know where to find those things in the current RDA toolkit.
Because there's the crosswalk and.
Because the crosswalker,
Point
I've
toward.
done enough time with it,
You know where it is
and
to
in the
look.
current toolkit, aside from those things where there is something has been calved off or parceled off into the work and expression areas, and so I have to remember, it's like, oh yeah, there's particular rules, I have to jump 5 chapters ahead to actually figure out how to do that, or realizing that it's like, you know, something like a contents note is not well articulated in the current iteration of the RDA toolkit.
You have a
It's-
505 mark tag where you're listing out all the different chapters in a book.
Yeah, or the different, you know, if you have an
Sections.
anthology of short stories or whatnot, you know, you could list
Short
out,
stories, yeah.
list out all the individual titles. And those things, contents note represents a work to work relationship. So each of the chapters within a book, or each of the short stories within an anthology, is a work within itself
Mini-verse.
that then has a relationship to the work as a whole.
Right.
And so those are all articulated in the chapter on work-to-work relationships, except that articulation is not very clear and straightforward. There's nothing in there like, you know, in H2, this thing that says, you know, contents note, list the contents. You know, this is how you format the note, and so on. And RDA just says like, well, record the relationships between the title of, you know, between the main work and its component parts. And it's like, but it doesn't really tell you how.
Right.
And so basically, you have to know from experience that it gets strung together, you know, assuming you're using ISBD punctuation and
Right.
formatting, that it gets strung together using these ISBD conventions, and you have to know from experience with MARC that it gets parked in a 505 tag.
So a lot of it is still kind of theoretical and a bit beyond day-to-day practice.
Well, I mean, it's less effective as a set of instructions to
handbook.
give you a record than it is
Yeah.
Certi was. And that is only acerbated in the new beta toolkit.
Oh, good, something to look forward to.
Yeah.
So I hope this cleared up things a little